Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So in this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I am delighted to be introducing Neri Karra Sillaman. She's a refugee turned entrepreneur, an academic, and an author whose work explores identity, resilience, and the principles behind enduring businesses. She blends lived experience with rigorous research to illuminate what drives purpose-led, immigrant-founded ventures. Neri, hello. Thank you so much for joining us on Disrupt Your Career.
Hi, Claire. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Let's get going. Let's look at the story behind all this beautiful, fantastic written stuff about you. You began your life as a refugee at the age of 11, and you've gone on to become a global entrepreneur, an academic, and an author. What's been the guiding thread through this journey?
It's been education. That's very clear for me because, as you mentioned, I became a refugee with my family at the age of 11. We only had 2 suitcases to our name. In June of 1989, we left our home very abruptly, and we ended up in Turkey, in Edirne, which is the border, started our life in a refugee camp, literally in a tent. But in that very moment, as we crossed the border, I remember very, very clearly, and it is a defining moment in my life because I stood there at the border looking at the mayhem around me, not knowing where we are going. And I remember my father screaming, and I say this in the talks that I give, screaming like a wounded animal as he ran towards the border through the 2 suitcases that we have been carrying all this time on the ground, and he kissed the soil, which you call the motherland. Of course, I looked at my mom, who never wanted to leave home, who never wanted to leave Bulgaria, and I made a decision standing there with my 9-year-old brother next to me that the way out of this will be if I get a good education. It will be the only way. And I didn't have a role model. No one in my family had gone to university. My father has the highest level of degree in my family, and that's more like a trade high school diploma that he had. And he was a builder. He worked as a builder in Bulgaria. And I was very ambitious, but ambition is a beautiful thing. And it led me to where I am. From that moment on, despite not properly speaking the Turkish language, not even starting school in a regular way because we were in a refugee camp. And when I did start school, it was in a classroom of 83 students, and the floor, it was hay. We didn't have a proper floor because we ended up eventually living in one of the rundown neighborhoods of Istanbul called Esenler. So from there, it didn't matter to me what the conditions around me look like. My vision and what my North Star was, I need to get a good education. And it defines everything I do. Later on, we started our business. I do what I do because I believe in the power of education.
Beautiful. And not every 11-year-old finds that insight and clarity. You must have had something very powerful speaking inside that made it so obvious to you.
Absolutely. And I think the reason why that clarity came because of my family, because of being born to a Turkish ethnic minority that was persecuted during communism in Bulgaria. And I grew up knowing that I am different, that we are different, but not in a good way, because we are told from a very early on that our names have to be changed, our religion is wrong, we are somehow wrong, we have done something wrong. And you grow up with this feeling of inequality. And they say education is the greatest equalizer. I think that decision at the age of 11, standing in the border, came, but I really believe the foundation of that is as young as I'm 6, 7 years old. Even in Bulgaria, I thought I will go to university. I will be the first one in my family to go to university, because I thought if I did that, the conditions will be better somehow.
Great conviction. So I'm wondering, how did this experience of being a refugee and an immigrant shape your worldview beyond that clarity about education and around the ideas and realities of entrepreneurship and risk and legacy?
One thing I was even saying yesterday to my husband, I am very sensitive to inequality, whether that's inequality among people, social injustice. Unfortunately, in some ways, that made me a very sensitive person. So I say unfortunately because when I see the news, I get very overwhelmed, very emotional. In some ways, I feel helpless. But in terms of how we organized and built our business is very much built on respecting our employees, having this compassion, empathy towards people. Even how your product is made, you put incredible emphasis on the quality of not only what you produce, but how you do things. And I think that comes from the fact that I didn't start off in this fortunate, wealthy family in some ways, in these fortunate conditions. So I know what it is to be discriminated against. I know what that feels like. So I did what was in my power. When we started our business, I very much focused on equality, equal pay, no discrimination, respect to anyone who is a refugee, who comes from a different background, who is disabled. For example, in Turkey and in Bulgaria, where we created our businesses, we purposefully hired people from disadvantaged backgrounds. This was one thing. But in terms of risk taking, I would say in my book, I talk about the very last principle is dare to play your hand. It definitely makes you, and I think most immigrants, because they tend to leave their country, by definition, they are in some ways risk takers. It's a little more than that. They are able to recognize when opportunities are presented to them. And when they take that opportunity, they give it their all. So, you know, the Eminem song, you get one chance, one opportunity. I don't know the full lyrics, but they give it their all. Another thing from my own personal experience, but also my research shows me, the way they look at failure and the way I look at failure is a little bit different. It doesn't mean I am failure prone, but let's say I have an idea that I want to do something, I want something to happen, and it doesn't. I don't get the result I wanted. I will see it almost as a redirection. Instead of thinking I failed, the way I reframe this is I am being redirected. There is a better path for me. So at the age of 18, Claire, I actually, despite my desire to get into university, did you know I failed to get into university in Turkey? The results came and I was a valedictorian in my high school. So the results came and I failed to get into a university in Turkey.
That seems unimaginable, given
Yes.
what you're describing. This sounds like exactly the kind of life-changing story. What was it that allowed you to turn this into something positive?
When the results came in, and actually my parents were shocked because everyone, including myself, it was a great disappointment. Imagine I worked from the age of 11 until the age of 18. the light at the end of the tunnel was going to be being admitted to Turkish university. So the very first feeling was, I can't believe it. It doesn't mean I didn't feel sadness or shock or disappointment. I did, but I let myself feel that, and I immediately started to look for another solution. One solution was I have to wait one more year because it's a national exam that happens only once a year on one date. The whole country sits the exam. So I said, this is too long for me to wait. So I found a woman, an agency based in Istanbul, who helps you go abroad. And basically, I got admitted through exams and I worked very hard from TOEFL to the SAT. I sat all the exams and I got admitted to several universities in UK to study economics and Russian.
Молодец.
Yes. Вы говорите по-русски.
We won't go on too long in Russian because the listeners mostly won't understand. But yes, amazing. Keep going. This story is fantastic.
So, and then I got admitted to the honors roll of University of Miami and Boston College, but Boston College said she can come in September 1996. And University of Miami said she is allowed to come right away in January. So I said, I'm going to Miami. My parents, by the way, had no idea that I've been doing this.
Ooh, okay.
So, yes, I went to them and basically said, here is University of Nottingham. I had to tell them that what I've been doing. My mother objected. She said, I'm not sending my daughter abroad. And my dad, part of the reason why I also had this ambition for myself is because I think he really wanted his children to succeed, because he was never given that opportunity to even get an education. And the rest is history. I went to University of Miami in January of 1996, and it was the most disorienting thing I experienced, even more so than the immigration in 1989. Because in University of Miami, I didn't realize that at the time, but I took a suitcase, that's it. And it's incredibly wealthy students who seemed very at ease. Of course, majority of them were American, very at ease with the professors, very at ease in the college environment. And I literally felt like fish out of water. By now I know if I really want to achieve something and it doesn't happen, it means there's a different way. Writing the book, I got rejections for 2 years, but I kept changing the book proposal, trying in different ways, and in the end it resulted in Pioneers. And my original book was going to be about resilience, so a complete different book. What I learned is to trust the detours of my life.
So you find yourself at University of Miami, you're completely disoriented. You've got this conviction that education is the path. Take us quickly through those years of study and how you did indeed adapt to the environment you had found yourself in, and how you got from that to your venture into luxury and global brands.
The way I adapted, I don't know if it was the healthiest way, but it was the way I was able to do at the time, is focus on my studies. One thing I would probably change is I would make myself be a little bit more social. At the time, I was so insecure. And as I said, fish out of water. The only thing I know how to do very well is to study. So I continued to do that.
Yes.
And I graduated in 2.5 years. It's a
Wow.
4-year college, as we all know. But it's my safety to study, to work, to just be in my own box in some ways. But I also was very much a dreamer, because I start my book with this story where I was in the computer lab seeing a computer for the first time. in January of 1996, and where the teacher basically, now we have to learn how to work with this computer. And I discovered the chip that powers it is also created by a refugee, Andrew Grove, the founding CEO of Intel. And realizing that America is built by immigrants, and it's become such a heated rhetoric to talk about immigration and immigrants. But at the time, discovering that some of the most inspiring companies, that Procter and Gamble, for example, Estee Lauder, they are all created by immigrants. And it gave me, especially at the time, this courage. What is possible for another immigrant or a refugee is possible for me too. And back in Turkey, my father was selling leather products, making commission, jeans, import extra textile, selling them to Russia and Ukraine and the former communist countries that have just come out of communism. And the idea was that why don't we create our own company, leather products? And I worked as a translator from the age of 16 before coming to Miami. So I knew the system. I have known the suppliers of some of the best leather products. But instead of buying the leather at full price, we knew that they discard most of the leather that is not used. Either they can give it to us for free, or we will buy it for much cheaper. And that's how we created our very first collection. And I went back to Turkey. Instead of staying in United States, I did feel very lonely. I'm not going to lie. I was very lonely and I had nobody in the States. It made sense for me to go back home.
And build something.
Yes, build something with my family. And that's what we did. And then after several years, I didn't want to live in Turkey. That's the thing. Once you taste the freedom of living abroad, of traveling, you want to keep going. You want to still have that. Once you have a taste of that freedom, freedom of mind, freedom of thought, of traveling, of physicality, everything. And I applied to do a PhD at University of Cambridge, and that's what led me to the path of academia.
Beautiful. One of the things I'm wondering is how much you were doing these things in parallel or whether they were serial pivots. You're building the brand, which eventually has become a global luxury brand. Take us through that parallel or series picture and show us just how versatile you are.
It was very much in parallel because I was doing this not by myself, with my family. Mom, my dad, my uncles, my aunts, my brother, everyone is in the business. Everyone. So when you have that, it's a little bit easier to say, oh, by the way, I am going to go and study an MBA while we are building the business. So I still travel to Italy almost every month. Every other 2 months, we will go to Russia. At the time it was possible, we will travel to Bulgaria and talk to our suppliers. But for example, when it was time for my parents to open a store, we will have a distributor in Ukraine, just to give an example. And my parents will travel to Ukraine with my brother to help our distributor open the store. And when there was an event, my brother jokes about it. He's like, you are the face of the company, but we will do the hard work, which is to build like actual stores and so on. And I was able to do that, but the two are very much related in some sense, because even for my PhD, I use my company as an in-depth case study, because my PhD, it was a qualitative research, and I used my company as a case study. So one of the papers is about researching my own culture. So autoethnography, I used autoethnographic research. And all of this connects because while I'm actually building the business with my family, I am also using that as part of my research.
Absolutely. It's almost a hall of mirrors, right? I mean, it's you and this thing, and you're looking at it as the researcher and also as self. What, if anything, surprised you about the you, the identity that emerged through this time?
What surprised me, and this was something that redefined the next part of my life, I would say, because I think as an immigrant daughter, I was very much focused on the other, meaning to be a good daughter, to give back, to be not obedient is not the right word, but to give back, because once you are especially first generation immigrant, the eldest daughter, you almost have this sense of responsibility towards your family. At the age of 33 or 34, I suddenly have this realization at my best friend's wedding in Cheshme, and I was sitting at a kids' table. That was the only place available. Yes. And having this realization that I am actually living my life for someone else. It is part of identity, because when you have the identity, I am an immigrant daughter, and even the identity of having a brand after your name, it can somehow restrict you. And I have the realization that if I continue on this path, where my life will go, but I want another path for myself, but it will take a lot of courage to stand up to my family and say, by the way, I have news for you. I now want to be out of the business and I want to forge my own path. I went and did exactly that. So I said, I have been very happy doing this together. At the same time, I don't know what that is going to look like yet, but I'm going to go back to London. I was doing some part-time teaching in London, and I said, I want to create my own path apart from the family business. So it was quite difficult for them to hear it, but I had to do that. And I locked myself in my tiny little apartment in London and worked on my CV, worked on a book idea, which became Fashion Entrepreneurship. It's an academic book, it's a textbook on fashion business. And the path led me to getting a job offer as an associate professor in business strategy at ESX School of Management here in Paris. I'm sure you know the school.
Very well. Yes.
So I said, you know what? I'm going. And it was between Bocconi and ESEC. But ESEC had a very good offer for me. And I said, even though I know nobody in France,
You've done it before.
yeah, and the path is leading me there. I put my trust in God. I said, now show me the way, because I don't know what's next. And I took the step that was shown to me. And having this courage, but also faith, I think the two go hand in hand, courage and faith. So that's what I would say surprised me about myself, how I was able to take that step, because it was not an easy one, but it completely changed my life. Completely. This is something like, if for those of you who listen to the podcast, for your listeners, if you are not happy on your path and there is a decision that you think is right, but it's going to require a lot of courage and it will make people uncomfortable, do it, because it will be life-changing.
Thank you for that. So once again, you put yourself in the position of being an outsider, culturally, geographically, and socially, all at once, linguistically. How does this state of being an outsider become a strategic advantage in building businesses or other things in an enduring way?
You are able to see angles and gaps that not other people are able to spot. That's the biggest advantage. And we have done it in our business, for example. When we were starting, I'm talking about something that happened 26 years ago when we started our business, and identifying that there are suppliers of some of the very high-end Italian French labels that discard their leather skins that are in perfect quality, but out of season, or they have a small defect, the color didn't take well, or something very minor. And to say, oh, I can take that, make products out of it, and sell it in countries where such a product doesn't exist yet. So you are able to spot opportunities, spot gaps, and I think that's the biggest advantage. You are able to adapt faster, and I think it makes you also a long-term thinker, because something that happens, whether it's a relationship or a connection, there is this value of that connection as well. And a delayed gratification. I think these days everything is so fast, everything is just consumed fast,
Completely.
achieve fast, fast growth, growth for the sake of growth. With the immigrant mentality, in my opinion, that's a little bit different, because you are born into conditions that don't have that. And you don't say, oh, I'm going to just go and buy a computer even though I can't afford it. I mean, I'm just giving that example because I'm staring at a computer. There is that delayed gratification. And I think when they build businesses, that really shows. And I call it frying in your own oil as one of the concepts.
That's a very evocative image to use. As we think of the principles that you identify in Pioneers, you've just made a beautiful visual. But let's imagine if listeners could only take away one of your principles, would it be frying in your own oil? And if so, can you maybe take us through just a little bit more detail that's going to mean it stays with us?
For me, this is a Turkish saying. Kendi yağında kavrul translates to fry in your own oil. And it was very much what I grew up with in my family, because you are born into these conditions of lack, but then it's because of that you value what you have. And Michael Porter talks about sustainable competitive advantage. I very much think this applies to sustainable competitive advantage as well, because you look into your own resources, you look at what you have. That includes your own internal capabilities, but includes people who are in your life, people who your suppliers, everyone. And you make the most of it. How can you utilize all of what you have in the most optimal way? So when you are able to do that, and when the conditions that made you successful are no longer there, you can still adapt, because it's not just about one resource or one capability, but it's more about how you were able to redesign. You have been able to design your system that makes it work, but then when the conditions disappear, you can do it again. So that's one thing. So I think it applies to startups as well, because I work with startups at Oxford. One thing I warn them, and unfortunately I've seen it when the advice is this principle is not applied, and you immediately go out to raise money and rely on outside investment, that startup is going to run into problems. So delayed investment will help your business, because it's going to unlock creativity. It's going to allow you to become highly resilient when conditions change. And we know conditions today change very rapidly.
Beautiful. I'm thinking that as you create and you work with whatever limited resources you have and you delay gratification, you're building your legacy, right? And you speak and write a great deal about legacy, and you do so with clarity and emotion. What does legacy mean to you now in business and in life?
How my work has an impact on others. For me personally, that's what it means. We do this work and it's not so I can say, hey, I wrote a book. I want this to have an impact, especially today. We talked about what we see in the news. I'm very sensitive to what I see in the news. And my legacy is how my work can have an impact for people, for others. Not just about how they create a business, but how they design their life, how they live their life, how we even think about immigrants, because we all know there is such a untrue sentiment and thinking around what immigrants are, what immigrants do. But the reality is very, very different. Statistics don't lie. Everyone is talking about AI, for example. We talk about innovation. Only in United States, if we look at the figures, people who run AI are foreign nationals, immigrants in United States. 40 to 45% of the AI founded startups are foreigners, are immigrants. And people in Silicon Valley, we know majority of them are not US born. And the irony here is that only 15% of immigrants make up American population. But then the impact that they have on businesses, on innovation, on science is outstanding. But what is shown at the moment is a very different picture.
It truly is.
That's what legacy is for me. To use my work for the betterment of society.
Thank you for that. It's important and very touching, particularly apt right now. I'm wondering if we could close with a little thinking back to the little Neri when she was 11 and she stood on that border. You've been through so many pivots and transitions and disruptions since then, many of them self-created, some of them emerged through the possibilities of things you maybe didn't even expect. But if you could give her just one or two words of guidance, what would you want to be saying to her?
I will say, you are good and keep going. Keep going, which she has done.
That's beautiful. Let's close with that and leave our listeners to think on it. Thank you so much, Neri, for joining me. It's been a beautiful conversation.
Likewise, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.